Welcome back. The Jewish New Year, or Rosh Hashanah, speaks to some of Judaism's most central values: the kingship of God, the call to return to his ways, and to do a kind of personal review of what went right and wrong with the year that passed. And joining me to discuss all of this and more is Rabbi Yitzhak Marmorstein, a member of the Orthodox Rabbi Kook Institute in Jerusalem, and Dan Herman, director of the international programs at Binah, the Jewish Movement for Social Change. Thank you both for joining me.
Thank you.
I want to start by talking about the idea of judgment, because, you know, Rosh Hashanah, we think it's the Happy New Year, everyone's celebrating, they're dipping the apple in the honey and wishing each other a sweet New Year, but there is such a serious undertone, really, to Rosh Hashanah, which it is called the Day of Judgment. Why is that, Dan?
I think Rosh Hashanah is really the beginning point of something. It's sort of the starter's pistol to a process that goes on and hits its peak in Yom Kippur. And that's this question of judgment you alluded to as well, this idea of personal reflection. And in Binah, we also believe it's not only personal reflection, but it's also communal reflection, and maybe even national reflection, to look at what we've done over the past year, what we've done right, maybe where we need to, and primarily the emphasis on where we need to get better. And as a secular movement, we're not only looking at that judgment as something that comes from outside, coming from God or some other higher being, but really a judgment of ourselves as individuals and as a nation, over how we can do things better and really bring about justice in the coming year.
And Rabbi Yitzhak, the other part of that judgment, though, for many who are more traditional, more observant, does have to do with God.
Very much so, and it's the Rosh Hashanah is the Shabbat of the year, being the seventh month of the year. It's the time we take the year, and now we step into the spiritual realm, and but specifically Rosh Hashanah was the time that we were called upon to renew and become to our highest self, to our most idealistic self, our self at its best. And the judgment is about what's stopping us from doing that, because that's what our Tzelem Elokim is, to express ourselves in the most whole, loving, good ways in everything we do in the world. And the judgment is what's stopping me from doing that. But Rosh Hashanah is a time for hitchut, for us to really bring this energy of renewal and manifest our highest selves.
Right, and there's the famous parable that accompanies this period, where they talk about God as a king who is now he's not sitting on a throne, he's with the people, that somehow in this month, our prayers, our conversations with God, he's so much more accessible in this particular month.
Well, we also make the focus. God is always accessible, but at this time, the Torah's practices take us, this is the time to do it. We can do it any time and all the time, but so God is always accessible, thank God.
I'm curious, Dan, at the secular yeshiva that you're running, how do people who are less observant, I mean, do you feel that young Israelis are actually talking about God or thinking about God?
I think secularism isn't necessarily, it doesn't mean atheism, but it is a different way of relating to a belief in some sort of higher power, maybe, or how we define God at all. Is God a being in some kind of way, or some sort of higher power, that a king and that kind of understanding of things, maybe in a religious setting? But God can also be some sort of commitment to truth, or maybe we can even define God in some sort of commitment to values, right? What are our values and understanding of social justice, and how do we create that in our society? And at a time like Rosh Hashanah and the holidays that come after it, where these are such incredibly meaningful parts of our culture and tradition, where many of those young Israelis don't necessarily connect to the religious understandings of those ideas, but we can create a secular understanding, because what Rabbi Yitzhak referred to, those are all things that are relevant for everybody, looking inside ourselves, seeing how we can become the best versions of ourselves as people and as a society, as communities as well.
And in the more religious community, that kind of looking at yourself kind of plays itself out in the ritual of slichot, these prayers where we ask for forgiveness.
Very much so, and to see the growing. They're in Jerusalem now every night, hundreds of thousands at the Kotel and everywhere else in Jerusalem. So it's an extraordinary phenomenon. But the beautiful thing about them, they're all in the plural. We're actually for all of Israel together. We're praying, and all of Israel's praying for all of Israel, and it's who we are. It's how we are, and we have a living experience with the Creator, and we're continuing to cultivate that here in the land of Israel, as the state of Israel, the people of Israel.
And Dan, as you said, the kind of climax of this comes with Yom Kippur. It even some would say it even continues through Sukkot, right? When many people understand that after this spiritual peak with God, the Jewish people gather and God stays with us during Sukkot. The link between this and Yom Kippur, it's quite evident there in the text, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's really a process that begins, and certainly in the tradition, if we talk about slichot, which is happening throughout this period, and different traditions like tashlich and things like that. And in the secular mind, it's also not only a question of these traditions that we undertake, this cheshbon nefesh and this looking within ourselves that we do, but it's also sort of the concrete action that we expect to come afterwards. I think there's something really beautiful and amazing about how after Yom Kippur, Sukkot, as you referred to, is this tradition of wandering, right? We're wandering around. We've done all this checking in ourselves, and we're still sort of wandering and trying to understand what we do with all of this. And for us in the secular yeshiva, we have these very big, across Israel, different ceremonies that we do for secular Yom Kippur observances, but they're all as part of an instigator for concrete action afterwards. If we do things like tashlich, where we're enumerating the sins or the ways in which we want to improve ourselves, it's very valuable as a symbol, but it's meaningless unless there's concrete action that comes afterwards when we go into the communities and we try and make a difference and try and influence.
Right, and that commitment to not make the same mistake and to change is really goes back for centuries. Rabbi Yitzchak, I have to ask you about Rav Kook, since you come from his learnings. Give us a little taste of what Rav Kook has said about Rosh Hashanah.
Well, very much he emphasized that principle, that in Rosh Hashanah we're invited to really be in touch, come to our godly self, to our essential self, and that's where tshuva lies. And then once we're at that, we express our truth, and there's no limit to how much good we can do in the world. It's really unleashing our good. And then, but there's an extraordinary, if I can just very briefly say, there was an extraordinary document that he left us, that he wrote for the people of Israel in 1934, in which he basically said the basic block for Israel's development is we're divided into camps, religious, non-religious, and we have to get rid of all of those names and concepts and understand that every part of Israel has something to offer, and that we need to work to really help each other and learn from each other and not be divided into all these encampments. And he said, Haredi, Chofshi was at his time, but religious, secular in our terms. And he said, all of that, Israel has to come together.
We're going to have to leave it there, but we will certainly talk more as we are just beginning the Jewish holiday season. Thank you so much, Dan Herman from Binah, the Jewish Movement for Social Change, and Rabbi Yitzchak from the Rav Kook House in Jerusalem. Thank you both.